In Disco Elysium, one finds a distinct sense of failure and decay everywhere. Almost every interaction had during your time in Revachol will highlight this. However, this crumbling world is rarely framed as an ugly thing. More often than not, there is beauty to be found in the decaying streets of Martinez and the lives of its inhabitants. From the bullet holes and bombshells that litter the walls and streets you inhabit, to the failed ideals and plans of the characters you meet. Even in the mind of the protagonist, one is able to see life in broken things in Disco Elysium. This is a game that finds beauty in crumbling buildings, abandoned towns and failed revolutions, and in the lives and stories of its characters. It uses the specificities of the medium to tell a story that couldn't be told outside of it. Namely, through a combination of its mechanics, characters, and themes, Disco Elysium examines failure, historical, political, and personal, and offers the idea that through failure, one can sometimes find better things. The world of Disco Elysium is tangible. Set in Martinez, a forgotten coast of a vast and unseen city named Revachol. Walls are strewn with bullet holes, and statues are left half dismantled. On occasion, the detective can piece together things that happened around him years prior, seeing history unfold before him. Despite its small size, taking less than 2 minutes to walk from one end of the map to another, Martinez is unrivaled in its storytelling scope. At every turn you see remnants of a once thriving place, broken by years of neglect and numerous failed regimes. It's often a sad sight, no doubt, but the prevailing feeling is one of endurance. This is clear in how the world is structured, how in tucked away places one finds groups or individuals finding a way to continue in this forgotten place. In an area known as the Doomed Commercial District, named as such due to the fact that every business that opens its doors there somehow goes bust, hidden behind a bookshop, you'll find a deserted game studio. Further still, in the bowels of this building is a lone woman, sitting in a chimney and carving dye. This woman has no idea that her business is being run out of an area that was declared doomed years ago. Or maybe she does, and simply chooses to fight it. This is where Disco Elysium's world design shows this beauty in the face of decay and failure. In the corners and hidden areas of Disco Elysium's map, you'll find people continuing on in the face of breakdown. More easily found is the fishing village, where the poorest of Martinez's residents remain defiantly, refusing to be forced out by corporate interests or the corrupt union who claims to be on their side. Further still, hidden behind an abandoned church, teenagers huddle in a tent, working to turn the abandoned place of worship into the world's greatest nightclub. These places and the people that inhabit them work to tell a story that is separate to the main plot of the game, but is crucial to its themes. Like the protagonist, who is a broken and forgotten man, Martinez has been abandoned by those in power, yet its citizens still persist and attempt to continue their lives despite it all. Martinez itself and its inhabitants are the most visible example of how Disco Elysium finds beauty in failure. However, the developers have managed to work this theme into the game's most prevalent system also. Unlike a lot of RPGs, where skills are some absent number that determine how much damage you do or how persuasive the player character is, the skills in Disco Elysium represent the different facets of the Detective Psyche. From an encyclopedic knowledge of the city around him to his ability to conceptualize, a skill that sees him talking to inanimate objects and vividly picturing the apocalypse. A lot like Martinez itself, the mind of the detective, Harry Dubois, is neglected and forgotten. Years of drinking has left his memory all but destroyed when he awakes in a trashed hotel room at the game's outset. Like the city's crumbled streets and bullet-strewn walls, the Detective Psyche is fractured and broken, separated into its 24 composite parts, with each of these parts speaking to the detective separately and willing him to do different things. On the surface, this separation acts to show the detective's fractured mental state in gameplay terms. However, through it, we are witness to some of the game's most endearing moments. From the detective's sense of drama, willing him to sing an extremely sad song on the stage of a local bar, to being able to converse with a giant invisible insect about man's destruction of the environment. Just like the game's world and its characters, the skill system represents continuing on in the face of neglect and decay, and through that, finding good things in life. This idea is reflected most clearly through the lack of any real failure state in the game. In my first playthrough of Disco Elysium, my detective didn't even die a single time. Rather, failing a skill check will often result in more interesting or entertaining outcomes than passing one would. Thus, through this, the developers have made failure a crucial narrative device. Failing to pass a check furthers the idea that is everywhere in Martinet, that one must find the good in failure. Instead of locking off options, failure produces different ones that are sometimes more interesting. For example, in the game's climactic gunfight, I failed a check, meaning my partner Kim was shot and spent the rest of the game in the hospital. Rather than make the detective face the game's conclusion alone, you wake from the gunfight to find CUNO at your bedside. CUNO is one of the first characters you meet in Disco Elysium, and depending on how much time you spend with him, he can be viewed as a foul-mouthed preteen with an addiction to speed, or a foul-mouthed preteen with an addiction to speed who will eventually warm to the detective and confide in him about his abusive father. So, if you fail this check and Kim is shot, you'll find out that because of you, CUNO has stopped taking speed, and then he accompanies you for the rest of the game's story. Thus, through failure, the developers have managed to create an equally interesting branch of Disco Elysium's story, and in turn reinforce the theme of finding good in failure through a branching narrative. Ultimately, Disco Elysium is a benchmark for the modern RPG. It makes a bold choice to remove any tedious combat, and instead chooses to focus entirely on the world and its characters. More than this, however, Disco Elysium is able to combine its gameplay, world design, and story into one theme: finding the good in the face of failure, be that through the world, the characters you meet, or the skills that make up the bulk of the gameplay. The developers of Disco Elysium have taken a story that in many ways could seem bleak, and instead produce something uplifting.